Good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Abs of October Red, and we are back once again. It's news and reviews, and this time it is about Zuffa Boxing, it's about SELA, it's about TKO. Just me clearing up my knowledge, trying to understand a little bit more about who is invested in our sport, the sport that we all know and love. What I will say is that it's comments. I'm not going to read them out here. You can go and have a look at them from two listeners that commented on the Leon Hughes conversation that I uploaded yesterday. The usernames are Russell Newton and Donny956. Go and have a look at the chat and tell me what you think. It will make sense why I've done this video when you go and have a look at what they've said in the comments. It was a very interesting debate. I'm trying to work out who Donny956 is. I think he's from the US. I'm saying that because of his spelling and the way that he speaks and his knowledge around like the American side of it. So it prompted me to go and do some research. I'm always open to be learning stuff in the comments for people to come and basically give me information that I wasn't aware of. And what Donny did, and shout out to him, he made me realize how ignorant I was, not intentionally, but how ignorant I was to not understanding who SELA and TKO is and what they actually bring to the sport, the powerhouse that they are. You're talking about a lot of money, guys, and that is what is being invested into Zuffa Boxing. So basically this video is about SELA and TKO, two companies that are changing boxing forever, and the business behind Zuffa Boxing. All of us know the names: Dana White, Turki Al-Sheikh, Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, but most of us don't know who Zuffa is funded by, what is behind it, who is SELA and who is TKO. So that's what I did some research on. A couple of hours I was looking over YouTube, asking Google a lot of questions to try and get my head around it and try and understand it more. This is what I've come up with, and if you weren't aware of this, this video is for you. If you got your degree and you know everything, I'm extremely happy for you. But if you don't, join in with us, have a listen and tell me what you think. So what we're going to be breaking down, it's all in the description, but what SELA is, how SELA evolved, the role SELA plays, what TKO Group Holdings is, the influence of Dana White, why TKO entered the boxing industry, the creation of Zuffa and what it could mean for traditional promoters, ongoing debate around centralized boxing structures, potentially the causation of why some of our traditional promoters are ending up in some sort of legal argument with Zuffa. And basically the UFC style, is that now going to be standard for boxing on a whole? Are we going towards that centralized system? So it's a discussion about power, influence, money, media rights, and the future direction of boxing. It's entering a new era, and I was a bit of a skeptic, and I was like, I'm not sure about this. But listening to what the fighters have said, and I'll give you an example. I spoke to Jack Massey, that conversation's out. And one of the key things he said to me, because I said, look, within the industry, it's like, you know, what we've been told is basically Zuffa's taking on the has-beens. He's taking on the people that don't really have any ambition, people that are not looking to be world champions, etc., etc. And he said, he doesn't see it like that. They're paying fighters a lot more money than traditional boxing. Like I said, you can have a listen to his conversation. He said he signed a 3-fight deal. He knows when he's fighting. The boxing tends to work around the UFC schedule, so it's quite rigid, it's quite strict. He says if he wins his fight, his money increases. If he loses, it doesn't, but it's still not a bad pay. And then there's always an opportunity for him to win again because he's got that 3-fight deal. So he was happy about the structure. And then I spoke to another one of his fighters, and he was like, yeah, they offered us a deal, which was like, we had to grab with both hands. And it's like, okay, maybe, because this is the first time I'm actually speaking to Zuffa fighters. So maybe I need to do a little bit of research And like I said, the 2 comments on YouTube made me want to do this video for you guys and for myself, really, because I learned a bit. So obviously, you know that for years, boxing's been controlled by a network of promoters, broadcasters, sanctioning bodies, governing organisations, and this is global. So obviously we've got the names, the household names: Matchroom, Queensbury, Top Rank, Golden Boy, the ones that we know, PBC, etc. But behind the scenes, as we can see, and I can't even say it's behind the scenes anymore. I'd say that it's regurgitating itself to the very front of the line. It's becoming sickeningly obvious. You can't avoid it. It's changing. Boxing is changing, and it's shifting from the traditional promotional styles. And I'd say that because it's aggressive. The tactics are extremely aggressive, and they're in your face. Before, you know, it was there, it was happening, it was rumbling behind the scenes, and I'd like see the odd flyer and I'd be like, okay, yep, this is happening. But it's pushed its way to the forefront now, and it's unavoidable. So that's the difference. It's penetrating the UK. Maybe that's because they've got the show on this weekend. It could be that, you don't know. But it's definitely pushed itself to the forefront, and it's something that we can't avoid anymore, no matter what our British promoters say. If you're listening from the UK, there's an elephant in the room, and it's a massive one. So we've got 2 organisations, like I said, that me, you know, I can call myself a casual. I'm not a pugilist by any words. I'd say that I'm more on the casual side of boxing, but I do appreciate and respect the sport. And I'm constantly taking information to obviously get better with the knowledge that I've had, understanding that it's still interchangeable, and you can know one thing one day and then it can change the next. It's never static, you know. So we're going to talk about SELA and TKO together. Both of these organisations are shaping what may become the biggest structural change in boxing for decades. I want to understand where we could be heading, and for that I need to find out who these companies are. I'm not talking about digging into a company's house and looking at their finances and stuff. I just want to know, this is like some background information. If you want to do that digging, that's on you. But the first question was, you know, what is SELA? And I think the name means something like bringing together, uniting, or I thought it stood for something. Like TKO means technical knockout, you know. So, but this actually, it's actually a word. It means the bringing together, or advertising, or something like that. I did Google it. I didn't manage to type that one out. So it was founded in Saudi Arabia in 1997. That's a long time ago. What we're looking at, 29 years ago. So it's old. Unlike traditional boxing promoters, SELA was never created to stage prize fights. That wasn't what their aim was to do, 29 years ago. The company began as a sports and marketing business and became recognized as one of the first FIFA-accredited sports marketing organizations in Saudi Arabia. So if you guys know that, you got your degree and you know everything perfect, like I said, you haven't got to listen to this. This is for the rookies like me that are learning as we go along. And I should have probably looked into this earlier, but I'm looking into it now. Better late than never, right? So over the time, however, SELA's expanded far beyond the sports representation. The company then moved into entertainment. So you've got tourism, venue development, live events, commercial partnerships, and large-scale experiences. And when you say experiences, obviously that's around the tourism side. Today, SELA is one of the most influential entertainment and events companies operating in the Middle East. I don't know what other, competition they've got out there, but yeah, I can say that's the biggest one. But boxing fans only really begin paying attention when they're brought, obviously, boxing to it. They introduce themselves into boxing. So we look at the Saudi sports revolution, and I remember when Frank Warren was on TalkSport and he was talking about game change. It's going to be a game changer, and it's Battle of the Baddest, and it was Fury and Ngannou, and he was like, what the hell's this? And, you know, it was all out in Riyadh, and it was Riyadh season, the red carpet, and it was all exciting, and yo, what is going on? So to understand the rise of SELA, we've got to understand their vision. And this number always gives me the creeps because I'm a bit of a tinfoil hat wearer. But they've got a Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 program. Yikes. Vision 2030 is a national strategy designed to diversify the Saudi economy beyond oil revenue. So in other words, they want to bring money in from other places except for oil. Sport became a major part of that strategy. So we're looking at football, F1. I mean, golf's a bit techie now with them, isn't it? Mixed martial arts, boxing. And obviously, it's a simple aim. Bring major global events to Saudi Arabia. So creating tourism, increasing international visibility, and position the kingdom as a major destination for entertainment and sport. It's what you do. You put the brand out there. You put the graft in. You go all over the place, but really you want everyone to come to you. And this is where SELA became critically important. So not acting as like a promoter, they became an organizer, an operator, and like a commercial delivery company capable of staging some of the biggest sporting events in the world, as we've seen. This has obviously had that effect on boxing. We've heard when Frank Warren was doing a lot of work with them, you know, SELA. We've heard Eddie mention SELA, Riyadh season. We've heard it, but it's like, well, who are they? We've got a little bit of a history on that now. So for decades, boxing biggest problem, and I can say this, it's one of the words that we can use, it's disjointed. It was a little bit fragmented. I would say that because of the belts. The belts is a major thing for me because they seem to create a belt, some do anyway, seem to create lots of different belts for lots of different reasons. And I understand that there's, you know, you got the 4 belts. There just needs to be one world champion for each. There doesn't need to be an interim. There doesn't need to be a silver. There doesn't need to be any of that. It's just the world champion. And obviously there's a ranking system under it where you got your number 1, your number 2, etc., etc. So to me, that's always been a bit of a niggle of mine. You could say, oh, that's because you've not been bothered to look at the history around. Maybe I haven't. But to me, that's what gets confusing. So say what you want in the comments. Fragmentation, disjointedness with the belts has always been a bugbear for me. So yeah, fair enough. We've got multiple promoters. We've got the multiple broadcasters. Multiple competing interests. I don't mind that kind of competition. I think it's great to have lots of different promoters with their stable of fighters. I think that competitive side is really good for boxing anyway. I can't argue about that. My kind of niggle is all of the belts. So fans potentially were complaining about, you know, maybe we just need to get the best fight in the best. Why is all of this, you know, faffing about? And one of the major things, an example that I can give you is, like I said, I went to the press conference for Usyk Rico. Usyk started the press conference by saying, listen, I've done everything that you've wanted. I've fought everyone. Let me just choose who I want to fight for a change. That was almost a cherry pick gone wrong. Obviously, that has created some controversy now. Turkey got in the ring and was like saying, nah, I don't like that. You're going to have to rematch him. But then Ajit Kabayel standing there like a sideman saying, but I'm mandatory. I've been mandatory. I've let you, you know, he's been allowed to have this fight while I'm waiting on the sidelines. And now you're telling me I'm going to have to wait again. Yeah. So it's got to the point now where it's like, what do the public want? Do they want to see this, the ordered fights, the mandatory fights? Is that what we want to see? Because it's, you know, who should be world champion? Or has it got to the point now where it's not really about that? It's about exciting fights, and we just want to see exciting fights. And the exciting fights that are going to bring more money, the fighters are going to obviously pick the fight potentially that's going to pay them the most. So this is where we are, and this is why I said And like I said, you can have a go at me if you want. Do the belts really hold that much significance anymore with the changing scope of boxing? So Saudi came into the market, like that was an example, but obviously Turkey came into the market, and suddenly financial barriers that had previously prevented major fights from happening became far less significant. It's like, yeah, I've got the money. Yeah, you're all right then. Oh, you don't want to fight him? All right, what do I need to put on the table to make you fight him? And then all of that seemed to fizzle away, and we started to get some really competitive fights, crossover, as in different promoters working with different promoters. We've had the 5v5. That's even looking to do a re-up later on this year, part 2. So we know what's capable, what can happen when the money, not saying that it's limitless, but it's a lot higher than what you were getting. So the fights that we've had that were potentially never going to happen, Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, potentially Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua. We got the crossover with Fury and Ngannou, Joshua and Ngannou, obviously Joshua and Daniel Dubois. You know, these are like Queensberry, Matchroom. This is all different people working together. So we wouldn't have got those fights, let's face it. You know, we wouldn't have got them because we've been there before when the arguments happened and we haven't got them, and it's, oh, for God's sake. So there was that frustration, but then that frustration stopped. So many of these events were delivered with significant, and when I say significant, obviously that's the financial support, involvement from SELA. These fights wouldn't have happened. Massive cards featuring multiple world championship fights as well. Doesn't matter if you're with a different promoter. Let's get those unifications on. It happened. So while Turkey became the public face of the movement, SELA became one of the key operational engines behind it. Yeah. So then we move on to TKO. I know a little bit more about them, in all honesty, because we saw Nick Khan from TKO go into the Senate, into the House, to give his version on why we should make amendments to the Muhammad Ali Act. You know, we've already touched on that it's going to go through anyway, but whatever, fair play. So we know that TKO stands for technical knockout. But what I didn't realise is that the UFC and the WWE, which are under TKO Holdings, merged in 2023. Coincidentally, 2023, I'm sure, is when Turkey came into boxing. You could call it a coincidence, whatever. But it happened around the same time. The new company brought together two entertainment powerhouses under one corporate structure. You could argue were the conversations going on behind the scene, and was this part of a master plan that was always going to happen? We don't know. It could be just a coincidence. But for the first time, the UFC and the WWE would operate as part of the same publicly traded organisation. So the links, they are one and part and parcel of the other. The merger created a company worth billions of dollars and established one of the most powerful entities in global sport. I don't watch WWE. I know a few do. I've watched the odd UFC because obviously I've been strict, you know me, boxing. Having took a step outside of that, I went to a bare knuckle event. Interesting. So the people behind TKO then are Emanuel, Mark Shapiro, Nick Khan, who I've previously mentioned, and obviously Dana White. Dana White built the UFC from a struggling promotion into a global powerhouse, and his success came from creating a highly centralized model. The UFC model, the model that we often heard Eddie Hearn speak about in interviews, and Frank Smith. They admired that. I think they attended a couple of UFC events. You saw them sitting cozy together, and now they've become rivals. Now, competition is, you know, Dana White was UFC. There was no intimation at that point that he's going to get into boxing. So, of course, Eddie Hearn, Matchroom would want to have that centralized thing because it would bring them into total power over the sport. So yeah, of course, that's not a problem. But when Dana White entered the sport under Zuffa Boxing, it then became a problem because now you're trying to take away my business. or you're trying to infiltrate, we can get into that. You're trying to destroy my business or interrupt my business, because it's very aggressive. The tactics that are being used, however anybody wants to play it down, they're very aggressive tactics. So centralization is one of the key things that they like. Obviously, Zuffa's come out, their belts, they've been dismissive of other belts. And people can say about Jaya Pattaya, being fooled into this. Fighters, I've done this, I've even done a video on this. Read your contracts, understand, get a bit of business acumen about you. And if you can't do it, employ an external lawyer that's not in bed with your management team or your promoter. Yeah? So I don't really want to hear it, because you should be looking through your contracts properly. So if you get stripped, you know what it was. Dana publicly said he didn't really have any regard for any of the belts. So if you're going over to them, what did you think was going to happen? I'm not going to get into that common sense argument. So the UFC, and this is potentially how Zuffa are going to do it, they control the matchmaking, the rankings, the championships, obviously broadcasting relationships and fighter promotion. Unlike boxing, where power is spread across many organizations, the UFC is just one umbrella, isn't it? Like the WWE, one umbrella, that's it. So for years, Dana's argued that boxing's, he's called it, and these are his words, fragmented system prevented the sport from reaching its full potential. And now that obviously TKO and SELA are behind Zuffa Boxing, they've now got the opportunity to put that theory to test, basically. So then we have the birth of Zuffa Boxing. So a lot changed when SELA and TKO came together. Alongside Turkey, a partnership was announced that would lead to the creation of Zuffa Boxing. I'm going to pause it there, rewind. We've kind of gone over this before, but I'm just going to lay it out on the line. You're a business, you've got your competitors, you're doing okay, but you want some of your workers to potentially do projects together. That can't happen, because the leaders, the business owners are saying, I ain't working with him, I ain't working with him. So somebody comes in above you lot, and he's above you lot because he's got all the money in the world. He said, listen, we want to see this. I listen to, the customers. This is what they want. They want you two to work together, or you three, or whatever. So I'm going to pump money into your system. I want to learn about it. I'm really a fan of the sport, etc., etc. And you pump all that money into it. You get everyone working together, and then you've got all the ideas. You know how it works. And then all of a sudden you think, thanks for that. Now I'm going to put somebody else in charge of my company. I don't know what everybody thought was going to happen, but that's what's happening. And we've started to see fighters either at the end of their contract. Ben Shalom's done a few interviews saying that he's got fighters on this Bournemouth card this weekend for Zuffa that are still in contracts. And by the powers of Grayskull, I do not know how he's allowed fighters to go and fight on another card if they're still in contract with him. I just don't know how that works. Like I said, I'm not privy to see these contracts, but if your contracts aren't watertight, if they are flawed, people will find a way around it. The advances, you've got obviously specialist lawyers, sports lawyers, that'll probably tear some of these contracts to pieces. Maybe they were basic contracts and only designed for the eyes of the fighter. So somebody that's in a higher league than that can look at these contracts and basically tear them to pieces and say, well, actually, don't worry about that. Just come and fight for us. And that's what seems to have happened. I've heard that Shakur Stevenson, potentially Devin Haney, are going to also move over to Zuffa. So there's a lot of structural change. And I think what's sparked this is the fact that Zuffa are having their first show in the UK. That has woke a lot of people up, including me. So the name of Zuffa will be familiar to MMA fans. This is what I didn't know as well. Zuffa was the company that owned and developed the UFC during its rise to dominance. Once again, my ignorance, because I don't follow MMA. By reviving the Zuffa name, the message was clear. This would not just be another boxing promotion. The ambition appeared much larger. There's history to the name Zuffa. The goal was to create a new boxing structure, obviously in line with the UFC model, and one that could potentially operate differently from traditional promotional models, which, as I've just said to you, is a centralized system. They want to centralize it, so they buy in the fighters heavily. The top fighters, the cream of the crop fighters, will fight on the ring cards, and then you have this conduit to potentially fight on the ring cards, which is Zuffa. So you're developing the fighters to potentially fight on ring cards. That's how it seems to me. So a lesson that was borrowed from the UFC, and it was one that offered fans more of the fights that they wanted to see. And that's at least in theory. So I think this plan will work particularly well. I'm not biased in my opinion. I don't need a seat at anybody's table. As long as the money is pushed into Zuffa, I do believe they will be successful at claiming a lot of fighters, recruiting a lot of fighters. What the issue is, and what nobody knows, and what the future that nobody can't predict is, will SELA continue and TKO continue to fund Zuffa? TKO might, because obviously they're linked with WWE, UFC, but will SELA, will that Saudi money continue to come in? I think if it does, I think there's a serious aggressive competition ahead. I don't say it lightly, but yeah, I don't know. It's there's an evolution, there's a change coming. So for promoters then, our traditional promoters, the emergence of Zuffa Boxing will raise significant questions. And this is kind of my thoughts on it. And like I said, please let me know what you think. Will Zuffa Boxing simply become another promoter competing in the marketplace? There's always that chance. Not disputing that. I still do have my skepticism on the longevity of it. Does it represent something much bigger? Could boxing eventually move towards a more centralized system? Does that mean all the other promoters are going to follow suit? If a lot of the fighters end up leaving the traditional promoters, what happens to them? Yeah, will they all get amalgamated under one umbrella? There's a competition. There's competition ahead. Could rankings become more what's the right word for it? Like consolidated? Championships being simplified is one thing that I'll always put my hand up to and say, yes, I'd love that to happen. Broadcasters become more aligned under a single structure. Don't know about that. I don't think that will happen, but we'll see. So there's questions that we've got to answer. Obviously, like I said, we know that Frank Warren has got some legal arguments with the Saudis at the moment. I believe Eddie may have some issues with obviously the Conor Ben situation. It's a bit grey there. Obviously, you can't talk about it because obviously there's legal stuff going on. And then obviously now Ben Shalom's jumped out and said, well, they've taken my fighters that are still in contract and put him on the card. So there's a lot of that going on at the moment. How much we'll find out about that, I don't know. I think Ben Shalom's alluded to the fact that he believes that they've been in cahoots with Sky. I'm sure in a recent interview that he did, he mentioned that, you know, this is the issue, it's going to come out. It's got to do with Sky interfering with the fighters, etc., etc. But we'll see how it goes. Yeah, I'm surprised if it's that bad, his fighters. Allegedly, if they're still in contract, Chris Billam-Smith being one of them, how he's been allowed to sign with Zuffa, because his signing was announced ages ago and now fight this weekend. I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. So we'll see what happens with that. I guess everything will come out in the wash. So whatever we support, whether it's a traditional model with, you know, with the belts, the organisation, whatever we support, there's a change and it is happening. It's not quiet either, it's quite loud. It could take a lot of the power away from the promoters as well, but we'll see. And it's because of money. Before, the promoters had the branding, behind them. It's like, oh, you want to work for us? We're the brand. This is the brand. This is where you want to be. We're out there the most. We get the most views, the number. But I remember when I spoke to Joshua Boatsy, you know, I learn things from fighters when I speak to them. I don't speak to them for the sake of it. He said to me, you know, he visited a former world champion, the belt's there in his cabinet, and, you know, Boatsy was saying that he was starstruck with the belt. And the geezer said, it doesn't mean anything. You know, I've now got to go out and work a 9 to 5. So all the, you know, all the glitz, the glamour, the belts, the this, the that, does it really matter? And that's why Josh was saying, basically, he's got to go for the money fights because the belts ain't going to be topping up his pension. And that was maybe a year ago when I spoke to Josh about that. That was before the announcement of Zuffa anyway. But it just made me think now, the brand just isn't enough anymore, because if people are being offered like large sums of money, as you know, there is no loyalty. And who am I, who are you to tell someone not to get the most money for what they're doing as a profession? But is there longevity with it? If you get that big dough now and then say something flops, have you got enough of it? Is that big dough going to be enough for you to retire on? You know? And I'm not saying that they're going to pull the financials out of it, because we don't know. We heard Eddie speaking about Tom Aspinall being on a low-paid contract with UFC, but that's the UFC money. The Zuffa money is SELA money. It's Turkey money. And as Eddie knows, as all the promoters know, as we know from seeing the production of the shows and seeing the fighters really glow up or level up, we know that that's different money. So yeah, that's one for you. I hope it was a little bit informative. At least I know more about SELA. TKO's kind of there anyway. But thank you to those two on YouTube that commented. That made me think, you know what, I need to do some homework. So shout out to Russell and Donnie. I wonder who Donnie is. Who is Donnie? That's the question for today. Listen, have a fab weekend. I might be doing a watch along, I don't know. I can't have another internet crash on the weekend. But regardless, I will do a news and reviews, a pre-recorded, and put it up after. We'll see. But enjoy yourself. Have a great weekend and stay ready.